Good morning. This is Seven Daughters and Seven Sons, Part 2, Chapter 3. The next morning, I rode out beyond the city. There I met with Amin and Uthman, as we had arranged several days before. We carried bows and arrows with us. We were to hunt pigeons. They were not the most exciting prey, but we could go after them without the company of an entire entourage. We hunted them often when we sought a quick morning's exercise. Amin and Uthman were successful that day. Amin bagged 3 birds and Uthman 2. I, of course, shot none. I could not have hit the side of a house an arrow's length away that morning. As we always did, when noon came, we rested in the shade of a rock. We built a fire. Uthman plucked a couple of the pigeons, and we roasted them for our lunch. Usually, that meal was more delicious to me than all the sauces and sweets of my father's table. That day, I barely nibbled a morsel. "What is the matter with you, my prince?" Amin asked. "No matter how great your melancholy, your appetite has never suffered before. What's got into you today?" "Something has," Uthman agreed. "You're the best shot of the 3 of us. Today you couldn't have hit a stable door." It seemed as good a time to begin as any. "There is something on my mind," I admitted. "It's so strange, so bizarre I hesitate to mention it to you. You'll find the idea laughable." "Try us," Uthman said. "I, for one, my lord, can't imagine laughing at any words of yours." "Unless you intend them to be funny," Amin amended. "Well," I said, "you'll decide what you think I mean, since I don't seem to know myself." I turned from one of them to the other. From my tone, they had grasped the depth of my concern, so they had pasted serious, attentive expressions on their faces. Uthman's sincere, Amin's faintly ironic. "Nazir is our good companion," I began. "By my father's head," Amin exclaimed, "I thought you had some great revelation to make to us." "Be quiet," Uthman remonstrated. "Give Mahmud a chance." I spoke again. "Have you ever noticed anything odd about Nazir?" "Odd?" Uthman asked. "How do you mean, odd?" Different from us." "He's richer," Amin said dryly. "Perhaps even richer than you, my lord. His perfection gets on my nerves. It isn't human." "Anything else, Amin? Anything else?" I stared at him intently. "Why do you ask me?" Amin replied testily. "He is more your friend or Uthman's than he is mine." "Because of the things you said to him. Things you said to him the night that he and I first walked together, without you and Uthman." Amin's face grew dark. "That was an evil night," he said. I spoke out of turn. "Did you?" I asked. "Perhaps you suspected something Uthman and I chose to ignore." "You can't be saying what I think you're saying," Amin whispered. "Yes, I am," I returned. "Well, then say it," Uthman cried impatiently. "I don't know what you're talking about." I picked up a stick and began to draw circles in the sand. "I think," I said, very slowly, very clearly, "I think Nazir is not Nazir at all. I think Nazir is a woman." Uthman rose from his cross-legged position in front of the fire and knelt beside me. "My lord," he said very softly, "the pressures of state business have been very great lately. You've been tired, distracted. When a person feels that way, it's only natural for his mind to be prey now and then to wild imaginings. I reached out and grasped Uthman's arm. It's not my imagination, Uthman. It's a feeling. It comes from deep inside me. It's the only explanation I have for what happens to me sometimes when I'm with Nazir. Not all the time, but sometimes. Amin's voice was carefully expressionless as he spoke. It would explain a lot, he said. It would explain his never going to the bath with us. It would explain why he never hunts with us, not for pigeons or gazelles or anything else. On the other hand, Uthman insisted, there's much more about Nazir that makes such an idea absurd. He's a merchant. Actually, he's a great merchant. There are other men in this world whose interest in women is limited. I've heard of such things, and so have you. Most of these men are less honest than Nazir, and pretend to a prowess they don't have, that's all. But I've never heard of a woman making a profit of 20,000 dinars in 6 months' time. Women don't have the kind of mind that success in business requires. Women are not... He paused, struggling for the right word. They're not geniuses. Beautiful, good, loving, perhaps even occasionally clever. But brilliant? Never. Not in that way. Not in the way of business. Ask him, my lord, Amin said. That's all. Just ask him. Oh, come on, Amin, I protested. I can't do that. If I'm wrong, he'll never speak to me again. Amin merely smiled. You mean, Uthman said, you're not sure. That's right, I agreed. I'm not sure. I feel in my heart that it's so, but what you say, Uthman, is also true. No one I know has a mind more masculine than Nazir's. All right, then, Amin said brightly. You have another choice. Test Nazir. Yes, Amin, that is what I must do. What do you suggest? Amin stroked his goat-like beard. Challenge Nazir to a game of chess. There isn't a woman in the world who knows how to play chess. He's very good at backgammon, I reminded him doubtfully. Backgammon is largely luck, Uthman interjected. Chess is all skill. Women don't play chess. Have you ever heard of it? Uthman was right. Women did not play chess. It seemed a clever and easy solution. My mind was at ease for the first time in 3 days. I attacked what was left of the pigeons with relish. After we had eaten, we mounted our horses and rode back to the city. That evening we met, as we sometimes did, at a gaming house. Nazir was to join us, but he was late. By the time he arrived, I had already sent the servant for chessboards rather than our usual backgammon boards. 2 of them were set out on the low table in front of us. Amin and Uthman had embarked upon a game. When I caught sight of Nazir in the doorway, I waved at him with an eagerness I suddenly did not feel. A part of me did not want to know the answer to my question. If Nazir proved to be other than what he appeared, I would have lost my friend. If he proved to be just what he seemed, I would have lost... what? I was not sure, but I suspected that the love of women would hold no allure for me for a long, long time. There could be no winner at the game I was setting out to play, and I had not realized it until the moment I caught sight of him. But it was too late to stop what I had begun. Nazir's face lit up when he saw the chessboard, with the black and white ivory chessmen ranged in neat rows on the black and white squares. I haven't played chess in more than a year, he cried. You'll win easily, my lord. I've probably forgotten all I ever knew. My mind is desperate for the exercise. I didn't know you were so fond of chess, I replied dryly. You should have said something before this. Chess isn't as good for gambling as backgammon, he said as he took the seat opposite me. But let's put a little wager on the game anyway, I suggested. Why not? How much? 5 dinars. Nazir's eyebrows shot up. It was a large sum, far more than we ever bet on the throw of a backgammon dice. Then he smiled and shrugged. Why not? He repeated. If he was concerned about his skill at the game, there was no doubt of his skill at dissembling. We began to play. Amin and Uthman soon gave up the pretense of carrying on with their own game and watched us intently. After the first few moments, it was perfectly clear that Nazir knew what he was doing. Talking ceased. No more suggestions from Uthman, no more jokes from Amin. We were surrounded by silence. We must have played for more than an hour, not an unconscionable length of time for a game of chess, but long enough to prove that we were quite evenly matched. Then, because I could see only 10 moves ahead, and Nazir could see 20, he captured my queen. A few minutes later, it was check, and then mate. Nazir had won. A man. Nazir was a man. That night, as we walked along the quay, I had been dreaming. I had proved that to myself now. I forced a smile to my lips. Good game, my friend, I said. We must play again. I reached into my money belt and counted out 5 gold dinars. Nazir held out his hand. As I placed the money in his palm, our fingers touched. A spark seemed to leap between us. My hand trembled, and so did his. At that moment, I realized I knew no more than I had known before. The next morning, early, after another sleepless night, I sent for Amin and Uthman. They met me in my private apartments. I did not even greet them. The chess game proved nothing, I said, as soon as I laid eyes on them. My lord, Uthman cried, how can you not be satisfied? Surely it's perfectly clear now that Nazir is just who he says he is. There's nothing in nature that says a woman can't play chess, I replied. Nothing at all. All right, Uthman responded with equal fervor. If a woman can play chess, it's not a miracle. God didn't intervene directly to make it happen. But it isn't natural. It's a freak. Nazir is no freak. How can you even think it? Amin was pacing up and down, apparently lost in thought, his hand stroking his beard. Miserable as I was, I could not help but smile at the sight of Amin thinking. He looked like a monkey, mimicking a man as monkeys are wont to do. I indulged his little performance for a few minutes, and then I called out, "Oh, sage, cease your pacing. The time has come for you to grant us poor ordinary mortals a taste of the wisdom with which God in his beneficence has blessed you." Amin stood still in front of me, and then threw himself to his knees, bending his back until his forehead touched the ground. Now he was playing the part of the devoted courtier. "Amin, get up," I said. "Who do you think you are, a slave? You are a free citizen of Tira, so stop the games and tell me what you're thinking." Amin raised himself to a sitting position, crossing his legs tailor fashion. Facing him, I leaned against an array of silk cushions. Uthman was seated on my right side. "Listen, my lord," Amin said in quite his normal tone. "So the chess test wasn't decisive. I've thought of one that is absolutely foolproof. Take Nazir down to the vaults beneath the palace. Show him the armor and the jewels your family's been collecting ever since that merchant prince, your grandfather, became the greatest man in Tira. But the collections were begun long before that, I mused. They were begun by his grandfather. We go back a long way on this coast. What difference does that make? Uthman interrupted patiently. If Nazir is more interested in jewelry than in armor, you'll know he isn't what he appears to be. If he's more interested in armor than jewelry, you'll know he is who he says he is. Yes, that's right, Amin said. That's the idea. As before, my feelings about subjecting Nazir to such a test were nothing but confusion. I longed to know the truth, but whatever truth I confronted would be an unhappy truth. I was even more concerned about the way in which I was seeking the truth, by deceit and trickery. Was that a way to treat a friend? But if Nazir was indeed a woman, if he had been deceiving me and Amin and Uthman and all of Tira for over a year, was he entitled to anything other than trickery and deceit in return? On the other hand, if he was not lying, if he was who he said he was, then what was I doing to the man who was my friend? However, as before, once the game was launched, I was unable to pull back. I could not have stopped it if I had wanted to, and I was not sure I wanted to. That evening, when the four of us met in Nazir's shop, Uthman mentioned the enormous topaz his father had sold my father the previous week. Amin announced his regret at never having seen it, and I immediately responded with an invitation to all three of them to view the topaz and all the other treasures in my family's vaults beneath the palace. We wasted no time. We arranged to meet the very next day, not in one of the shops, but at the palace. Late in the afternoon, the three of them gathered in my rooms. 4 armed guards accompanied us through the damp, narrow subterranean passageway that led to the vaults, which were really caves hollowed out of bedrock and fitted with storage chests and cabinets by my wily ancestor. The narrow entrance to the caves was guarded by a small company of soldiers ranged along the passageway, spears and shields always at the ready. Even though he knew perfectly well who I was, the grizzled old captain of the guard inspected the pass impressed with my father's seal for a full 5 minutes before he let me through. My poor friends had a harder time. Their passes also bore my father's personal seal, for without such a document there was no admission at all to the caves. But that did not stop the old captain from grilling Amin, Uthman, and Nazir for half an hour, as if they were suspected thieves. I let it go on right to the end. It made a visit to the vaults that much more impressive. When all 4 of us were at last through the iron gate that separated the cave from the passage, I went immediately to the chest where the topaz was stored, since seeing it was the ostensible purpose of our visit. Gold chains, emeralds, and rubies set in rings, silver collars studded with lapis and massive turquoise, and pearls as big as marbles filled the chest to the brim. I held the topaz in my hand so the others could see it. It was as large as a harem lady's hand mirror, and it sparkled with the reflected light of the oil lamps, which provided the vault's illumination. Uthman stood back, having seen it many times before. Amin and Nazir leaned close. "It's magnificent," Amin said. "I've never seen anything like it." Nazir murmured a polite assent, and then turned his head to glance at some of the other treasures lining the walls of the cave. "Uthman," Amin said, "the topaz is only the beginning. He picked up an ancient Egyptian diadem in which the gold had been worked into the shape of an asp. "Look at this workmanship." "Nazir, come here," Uthman urged. "It's remarkable. My father would give his fortune to have something like this to sell." But Nazir had wandered away from the chest full of jewels. He was gazing in apparent fascination at a wall hung with 15 jewel-studded swords. "By my father's head," he called out in awed tones. "Where did these come from?" With a flick of my wrist, I slammed the chest shut. Quickly, I walked across the room and stood at Nazir's side. "Each sword," I explained, "was the most treasured possession of some Bedouin warrior. By rights, they should have been buried with their owners when they died, but they were too beautiful for that. Instead, they're kept here as an inspiration to less warlike types like me." "And if there's a war, will you use them?" Nazir asked. His voice sounded eager. "I don't know," I said. "There hasn't been a war in years. We are peaceful traders here. It suits the whole world to let that be. It suits the whole world that this particular port on the Mediterranean is always open, always available." My voice rose as my annoyance with him increased. "I hope that never changes. So far as I'm concerned, if there's never another war, it won't be too soon." I turned my back on Nazir and stalked out of the cave. But he hurried after me. My lord," he cried as he caught up to me. "Do you think I'm sanguine? Do you think I'm one of those foolish men who's never fought a war and therefore thinks nothing could be more marvelous?" "I don't know," I replied sharply. "I only know one day I'll be wali, and I'll think very hard before I spill the blood of the men of Tira." "If honor or policy demands it, you'll do it," he replied. "I know that war isn't begun lightly, but no city can avoid a war unless it's prepared to fight one if necessary." "That's true," I sighed. "Unpleasant, but true." Amin and Uthman followed us. The gate clanged shut once we were all in the passageway, which was too narrow for two people to walk side by side. I lengthened my stride and moved away from the others as fast as I could. I was taller than the other three, and my legs were much longer, so I was soon far ahead of them. When I reached the stairway that led back up into the palace, I turned and called to them, still halfway down the passage. "Good night," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." I rushed up the stairs then, moving as quickly as my dignity and my position would allow. I hurried to my own apartments. I did not want to see them. I did not want to talk to them. I was sick at heart. I knew now that I had wanted Nazir to be a woman. I had wanted him to be a woman so that I could love him as a man loves a woman, and at the same time love him as a man loves his friend. And my disappointment in realizing he was not a woman, that he could not be a woman, was so great that I was filled with a terrible bitterness, an awful sorrow. I wanted to speak to no one. I wanted to look at no one. Though wine is forbidden to the followers of Mohammed, we kept some in the palace with which to entertain our frequent Christian, Jewish, and pagan guests. I sent for a bottle, drained it to the dregs, and then I went to sleep. When I awoke the next day, the noon sun was streaming through my windows. My head ached, my tongue was thick with fur, my lips were as dry as if I'd been waterless in the desert for a week. I could barely move myself, but Ferris, who watched me while I slept, noticed the first flicker of my eyelids. "My lord," he whispered. "Hush," I cried. "Why are you screaming?" "I am not, my lord," he replied, stung. I shut my eyes against the glare of the light. It was not Ferris who spoke too loudly, or the sun that shone too brightly. They were the same as they always were. It was my own head that was different. It ached so much from the wine I had drunk that I would have raised no objection if a soldier bearing one of the Bedouin swords had walked into the room at that very moment and chopped it off. I sat up very slowly, and very slowly opened my eyes. My stomach turned over 3 times and threatened to eject its contents all over my cushions. I swallowed hard and triumphed over it, momentarily at least. "Who gave you leave to wake me at such an ungodly hour?" I scolded. "It's noon, my lord," Ferris replied. "I saw you move and thought you were awake. Your friends await you in the reception room." "Friends? Which friends?" Had Nazir come to tell me something? But what could he have to tell me? He didn't know I had any questions. And anyway, did I want to talk to him? I was in no condition to talk to anyone. But if I put him off, perhaps he would not come again. "The Lord Amin," my servant replied, "and the Lord Uthman." I sighed. "They are neither of them lords." I leaned back among the pillows. "Send them in. But bring me a basin first so I can wash." With Ferris's aid, I made myself presentable. Then he left the room. A few moments later, he ushered Amin and Uthman before me, and then, at my signal, he withdrew. My friends made themselves comfortable on some cushions. "Your face looks like a baboon's rear end," Amin announced cheerfully. "I never saw anyone look worse. What did you do to yourself after you ran away from us?" "Drank myself into a stupor," I replied shortly. "But why?" Uthman replied. "What did we do?" "It wasn't us, you fool," Amin replied. "It was Nazir. All that warlike talk proved to Mahmud that he is not a woman, and for some reason or other, a woman is what your prince wants Nazir to be. If I had known the trouble Nazir was going to cause, I'd have pushed him into the sea the first day I set eyes on him." Though Amin smiled as he spoke, something in his tone of voice told me he was not joking. "I don't want Nazir to be anything but what he is," I said. "I just want to know." "Well," Uthman responded reasonably, "now you know." "But you don't know, do you?" Amin said with an ironic laugh. "You're still not satisfied." "But why not?" Uthman asked. "Yesterday proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that Nazir is what he says." "Words," Amin murmured. "Just words. Words prove nothing." I had not been paying much attention to their argument, but Amin's next words cut through my foggy brain like a knife through an apple. "We can't deny what we see. Nazir's naked body will be proof enough even for Mahmud." He turned to me and looked directly into my eyes. "Would it not, my prince?" he asked quietly. I nodded slowly. "Invite Nazir to the bath, my lord," Amin continued. "Demand that he accompany you, as befits a friend. If he won't, then he is no true friend of yours." "Amin," I said, "fetch him. Tell him I'm ill and that he must come to see me, but tell him no more than that. Uthman, you can go with Amin, but keep your mouth shut." Poor Uthman. He looked as if someone had just thrown a pail of cold water in his face for no reason at all. He did not understand what was happening. But Amin did. While they were gone, I planned the course of the conversation I would have with Nazir. It would be subtle. Nazir would never suspect that I had a hidden motive for my insistence. I was so pleased with my cleverness that my headache and my nausea disappeared entirely. When Nazir came into the room, I actually had to pretend that I was not feeling well. The three of them entered yet together. Nazir instantly knelt down beside me. Amin and Uthman withdrew discreetly and seated themselves in the window. Nazir and I spoke in such low tones that they could not hear us. "My lord, you were in perfect health yesterday," Nazir said, a frown creasing his forehead. "What struck you down so suddenly?" "Oh, it's nothing, my friend." Though my words were dismissive, I made sure that my voice was faint and trembling. "Just a passing fever. It will go as it came, and if it doesn't, well, that too will be God's will." "My lord," Nazir cried, "don't say such things." His cool hand grasped mine and held it for a moment. I withdrew my hand from his as quickly as if I had just touched fire. After all, I had no fever whatsoever, and I did not want him to have the opportunity to figure that out. "Don't touch me," I whispered. "I don't want you to catch what I've got." "Of course," Nazir added thoughtfully. "You were probably coming down with it yesterday. You acted very strange. You left us so abruptly. Please accept my apology. I'm sure it was the fever working on me, and I didn't even know it." "Oh, my lord, no apologies are required." His voice was thick with anxiety. "My father had a fever not so long ago. He nearly died. I was causing Nazir pain, and for no reason at all." But that wasn't true, I told myself. There was a reason. There was. "What can I do for you?" he begged. "Where are your attendants? Why aren't you being properly nursed?" "Everything's being done," I assured him. "I sent them away. I didn't want them here when my friends were here. The room gets so crowded, and I feel as if I'm suffocating." I coughed mightily and then gasped as if fluid in my chest were making it difficult for me to breathe. Immediately, Nazir was behind me, plumping my pillows and readjusting them in an effort to relieve my spasm. "It's all right, my friend," I whispered. "It's past. In a few days, I'll be like new again. I'll be back in the shop, losing to you in backgammon and chess as usual." "Ah, my lord," said Nazir with a small smile, "I promise you that when you return, you'll win. You'll win every game." This was going to be even easier than I had thought. "And we'll take long walks on the quay at night," I said. "We'll walk and talk until the first light of dawn streaks the sky." "We'll talk about everything," Nazir agreed eagerly. "You'll know everything that's in my heart, and I'll know everything that's in yours." "We'll go to the bath together," I continued in that same faint, dreaming tone. "We'll lie side by side in the steam room as the masseurs rub the weariness out of our muscles." "We've never done that," I reminded him. "You've never had the time. But you'll have the time now, won't you? You won't let business stand in the way of friendship anymore." "I don't want to deny you anything, my lord," Nazir whispered, his voice so soft I could barely hear him. I smiled. "Good," I said. "I'll remember that." I leaned back against my pillows and shut my eyes. "I'm so tired now. I need to sleep. Thank you for coming, my dear friend, my other self." "Rest well, my lord." Again, his hand grasped mine. I heard the rustle of his jibbeh as he rose. I heard his footsteps as he crossed the floor to join Amin and Uthman by the window. Then I heard the footsteps of all three of them as they tiptoed wordlessly out of the room. For 3 days I remained in bed. I ordered a guard to stand before my door and say to anyone who inquired after me that I was too ill to receive visitors. Ferris and Abdullah, no doubt, realized that I was as healthy as a horse, but if I said I was sick, they dared not say otherwise. They were the only people who saw me. My father was hunting gazelles from his lodge in the Lebanon mountains. He was the only man who would have shouldered his way past my guard without my permission. On the morning of the 4th day, I rose from the bed as soon as I awakened. I shook Ferris, who was dozing beside me. "Wake up, dreamer," I cried. "I'm so hungry, I'll eat you if my breakfast isn't here in 3 minutes." "Thanks be to God," Ferris murmured, casting his eyes downward in mock humility. "My lord has recovered from the mysterious ailment that afflicted him so suddenly." I grinned and shook him by the shoulder. "Not so mysterious," I admitted, "but I can trust you to say nothing about it." Ferris rose to his feet. "About what, my lord? You were ill, and now you're better." I nodded. "That's what you'll tell anyone who asks. Now, you'll bring me some bread and fruit. After you've done that, you'll seek out my friend Nazir at the shop he shares with Jiha. You know the shop of Jiha?" "I know the shop of Jiha," Ferris replied. "I've gone there with you often enough." "Tell Nazir I hold him to his promise to meet me at the bath as soon as I recovered. Tell him I expect him there this afternoon, right after midday prayers. The muezzins call for prayers from the minarets of every mosque in the city." Nazir would not have the excuse of mistaking the time. "Tell him that after being shut inside for 3 days, I long to mingle with other men, and that I long also for his companionship. Do you have all that?" Ferris bowed. "Yes, my prince." "Say this, too," I added carefully, "but say it as if it came from yourself. Remind him that his promise was made to me while I lay on the deathbed from which I have miraculously risen, and that if he denies me, he risks the loss of my friendship forever." Ferris bowed again. His face was impassive as usual, but I knew him very well. And I noticed, as he lifted his head from the bow, that he glanced at me quickly and quizzically. Either he did not understand what was going on, or he understood and did not like it. But whatever he thought, he would keep his thoughts to himself and do as he was told. That was Ferris's great virtue. I saw to it that he was better paid than any other servant in the palace. His discretion was absolute, as was his devotion.